Then the president addressed via Twitter what exactly happened last night. He says, on Monday, they, meaning the Iranians, shot down an unmanned drone flying in international waters. We were cocked and loaded to retaliate last night on 3 different sites when I asked how many will die. 150 people, sir, was the answer from a general. 10 minutes before the strike, I stopped it, not proportionate to shooting down an unmanned drone. He said, I'm in no hurry. Our military is rebuilt, new and ready to go, by far the best in the world. Sanctions are biting, and more added last night. Iran can never have nuclear weapons, not against the United States and not against the world. Okay, so it is that sort of middle tweet there with which I have some issues. Right? The one where he actually spells out his strategy. So there are a few problems with this. One, he suggests that they were basically ready to go. The planes were in the air. They were on their way. And that's when he asked how many people will die. Now, the president of the United States should probably be asking that question before we load up the jets and get out there in the air, right? That should be kind of the first question you ask, is what exactly is this strike going to look like? What are the consequences of this strike? But be that as it may, the president calls it back. Now, it's his rationale that I have a problem with. And when he says 150 people were going to die and that was not proportionate, I don't know where this idiotic notion came from that if you attack the United States, we are supposed to be proportionate in our response. In fact, I think that's a terrible idea. The reason I think that's a terrible idea is because the United States actually tried something that was basically called proportionate response. It was actually called graduated escalation during the Vietnam War. It was a strategy put in place by then Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara. And the strategy, which is elucidated by former Trump National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster in his book, Dereliction of Duty. The book is all about how Robert McNamara and the LBJ administration blew the Vietnam War by engaging in this graduated escalation. The idea was that we would gradually turn up the heat on the Vietnamese, on the North Vietnamese, the Viet Cong, until they realized that we were very serious about this, and then they would back down. But that's not really how military conflict works. The reason that people don't want to get involved with you in military conflict is because they are afraid you will devastate them. Not that you will gradually turn up the heat, but that you will devastate them. Effectively speaking, foreign policy is much more like a high school playground than like a debate society. And a high school, junior high playground, there's always the one kid that you didn't want to fight because he was kind of crazy and you never knew what he was going to do. And there's always that one guy on the playground who you sort of suspected he might have a knife in his backpack, and if things went dramatically wrong, things would get really bad for you really quickly. Well, that's sort of President Trump's appeal, right? He said this before. He likes to be unpredictable. He likes to be the guy who is intimidating because you don't know what he is going to do. The fact is that if Iran knows that they can trade basically an unmanned U.S. drone for nothing, right? The United States is not going to retaliate in any way. Do you think they're going to stop pushing? They like this. They're the ones initiating this conflict. So here's what Iran is after here. Iran is after a couple of things. One, they want to force up the price of oil, so they need chaos in the region. Because the sanctions are working, because they have no money, they're deliberately trying to force up the price of oil by creating chaos in the region. They've basically become North Korea, except they are worried about the oil markets. And that brings us to the second rationale. The second rationale is that they are hoping that the sanctions will be dismantled if they act militaristic enough. They are hoping that they can sort of score the same deal that the Kim regime in North Korea has scored routinely with the West, which is we act like nut jobs. We launch nuclear tests every so often. We fire a few missiles over the Sea of Japan. And then you sign us a check and hope that we stop. That's what the Iranians were doing with the Obama administration. It's why they signed the nuclear deal. Give us cash, and we'll stop this for the moment, and then every so often we'll act crazy again, and then you give us more cash, and then eventually we'll have enough cash that we can do exactly what we want to do. That's the goal that is being pursued by the Iranians. And in order to achieve that goal, they also have to make the case to the Europeans that the Europeans should basically force the Trump administration to back down. So what they're going to continue to do now is push. And the Stalin line was that you push until you hit steel. And that's effectively what the Iranians are doing right now. They're pushing because they know that the left in the United States, the press, the media, are interested in boxing President Trump in. That they've created this false narrative where President Trump is the truly erratic force here, that President Trump is the one who is driving the conflict, that President Trump, if only he were a little bit kinder to the Iranians, none of this would be happening. Everything would be going back to the wonderful way that it was just before that evil President Trump took office. The Iranians know exactly what the Europeans think of President Trump. They know what the press thinks of President Trump, and they are playing that to the hilt. That's what this is. All of which suggests that the president is going to have to take action here sooner or later. Truly. Now, the Iranians may be careful. They may be careful enough that they never shoot down an American manned aircraft, that they don't actually kill an American, that they just sort of keep this at a low level of boiling conflict, hoping that the Trump administration will back down. But that is not a good thing either, because sooner or later, they will do something that damages us enough where we do have to retaliate. If you want to stop this thing in its tracks, you do have to show the Iranians that if things get real, the Ayatollahs are not only not going to be in charge of Iran anymore, they are not going to be breathing anymore. Because there's one thing that the Iranians want a lot less than the United States does, and that's a war. It's very funny in the United States because none of us want to go to war with Iran. I don't want to go to war with Iran. You don't want to go to war with Iran. Nobody wants war with Iran. Nobody wants hundreds of thousands of troops invading Iran. Nobody wants American lives lost. Nobody wants any of those things. You know who wants war with the United States less than the United States wants war with Iran? The Iranian regime. Because if it goes to all-out war, that regime does not stand a chance. And we should note here that there are a bunch of options still on the table for President Trump. But what is being pursued right now looks a lot like a Clintonian foreign policy, and that is not a good idea.